This video is brought to you by Atlas VPN.
Hey noble ones, thank you so much for clicking, thank you for watching my content and supporting me. Today we're going to have a great time together. Now this is episode 5, 7, I don't even know anymore. Anyways, these are all the other episodes of this series and you'll find links in the description below. Today we'll find some historical facts that we double-checked, triple-checked, that will blow your mind. Glass is something that I believe we all take for granted, but the reality is, even though it's a commodity that we use every single day, whether it be a freaking window or something we use to drink or to even see, how old is it? When was glass first invented? Which civilization came up with this? I mean, is it medieval? If you think about it, there are so many churches with all those beautiful vetrate. I can't even think of the word in English for now, but is it medieval? Oh no, it's not medieval. Check this out. The invention of glass is normally attributed to the artisans of a specific culture called the Mitanni. And apparently this is how you write it in Hittite. I don't speak Hittite, so there's that. We're talking about a Near East Bronze Age kingdom, and the territories would be part of modern-day Syria, northwestern Iraq, and southern Turkey. The Mitanni kingdom is very interesting because it was supposedly founded by an Indo-European warrior aristocratic class, the Mariano, who forced themselves on the local Hurrian populations as a ruling class. So the very first mentions of worked glass come from the Mitannic city of Nuzzi, which would be in modern-day Iraq, dated between the 15th and the 14th century BC. Yeah, never mind the Middle Ages, this is really ancient tech. Historians, however, are proposing an alternative explanation, so it's either connected to the Mitanni kingdom or to the ancient Egyptians. One of the two invented it first. And if the Egyptian production will be the correct one when it comes to the first inventors of glass, then it will go back to the 15th century BC. The overall idea being that the Mitannic kingdom was in fact trying to reproduce what was already invented by the Egyptians. Now today, as I do every day, I'm wearing something else that we also sort of take for granted, and we can see it through my wedding band or wedding ring, which is of course gold. Now we know that gold is really ancient. I mean, yes, medieval kings, all about gold, but also, the ancient Romans loved gold, and you can go all the way back to Mycenaean civilizations. But what is the most ancient gold ever found? And when did this fascination with this noble metal begin for the human species? Well, the most ancient manufacts made of gold were found in the necropolis of Varna on the coast of the Black Sea, eastern Bulgaria. And these are dated, brace for it, between 4600 to 4200 BC. So almost 7,000 years ago. And that's probably not even the oldest, it's just the one that we have found. So this interesting revelation comes with two questions attached. First, what did it look like? I mean, did they still make something 7,000 years ago that we would find beautiful, aesthetically pleasing in 2023? And number two, what are the conditions of this gold? I mean, 7,000 years old gold? Is it still looking pretty? Yeah, brace yourself, I'll say it several times today. So in this specific hoard, we have several typologies of objects, such as scepters, rings, bracelets, plates, fibulae and decoration for clothes, for a total weight of 6 kilograms of gold. And personally, I find all of these still very relevant even to today's modern taste. Would you wear any of these? Let me know in the comments. Maybe it's just me. With that being said, another thing that this sort of finding reveals when it comes to these civilizations in the burials of Varna is how sophisticated of a civilization this was. And by examining and studying the ceremonial burial, we also see that there was a certain level of hierarchical stratification or strata within society, with extremely rich burials filled with all sorts of great goods and jewels and weapons, and others that were rather modest, with just a little bit of pottery in them. In other words, most of the wealth was amassed within the belongings of very few individuals, or the ruling elite, whereas the rest of the population was most likely struggling to reach the end of the month. I mean, not much has changed in 7,000 years, has it? However, let's focus on burial number 43, which is the richest of all, the sort of Elon Musk of 7,000 years ago, I suppose. The so-called man of Varna must have been the leader of this community. 1.75 meters of height, died at either 40 or 50 years of age. He was buried with a scepter, several precious items for a total weight of 1,516 grams of gold, and a few weapons, including, interestingly enough, as you could probably see, axe heads made of copper. Curiously, he also had this, which I'm not gonna say what it was. If you want to go Google this, at your own risk. Now, if there is something I know without needing to make a poll, is that the majority of people watching this channel love swords. Now, there are loads of different types of swords in history, for example, like this beautiful katana, and of course swords come in all sizes. Can I even get this one in the shot? Probably not. Now, personally, my favorite swords are European, usually late medieval. I really like spada di lato, that's what you call it in Italian, so one-handed swords. But what is the oldest sword ever made? When did people start making swords for combat? Now, if you found any of this interesting, well, there is much more to come, as we will see after a brief word from the kind sponsor that made this video possible, Atlas VPN. Now, if you're like me and you like to surf the internet looking for interesting historical information, it's a great idea to do it in safety, which is why you should totally use today's sponsor, Atlas VPN. A VPN is a virtual private network that makes all of your internet traffic travel through an encrypted tunnel, and this way it protects you from spying, public Wi-Fi dangers, it hides your IP address, and online activities. Atlas VPN is a great choice because it was developed by cyber security specialists, and among other things, it gives you access to the Data Breach Monitor, which is a security feature designed to track any data breaches related to your online account, automatically scanning any leaked information. But another add-on through Atlas VPN is the fact that you can use Netflix from any countries, regardless of where you are. So let's say that you wanted to watch a show that is only available in the UK, but you live in America. No problem, just change your country through the VPN and boom, access granted. I always have Atlas VPN active on my machines, and that is because one account lets you use multiple devices. I personally really like Atlas VPN not only because it's a great choice, but also because it's really affordable, and that links to today's special offer. Get the Christmas price cut. That's $1.70 a month for 3 years plus 6 months for free. If you've been considering getting a VPN but you weren't sure about the prices, then now is the time. And don't forget to click the link in the description. That's $1.70 a month for 3 years plus 6 months for free. Keep in mind that this is a time-limited offer, so be quick and click the link in the description. And big thanks to Atlas VPN for sponsoring my video. Now, the first swords that we know of, so from an actual finding, are from this specific site, which I have no idea how to pronounce, in modern-day Turkey. And these date to 3000 BC, so for what we can estimate with what we have found, the sword is at least 5000 years old, probably older than that. But since this is what we have got, let's check them out. Now, being this old, of course, we're not talking about steel blades, we're not talking about iron blades either, we're talking about bronze blades. But what's interesting about this is that whenever we think about bronze, usually it's an alloy of copper and tin, but in this case, tin is not in the equation and is what is called arsenical bronze. Now, I've spoken extensively about arsenical bronze in these videos, so if you want, once again, today, loads of links in the description. Merry Christmas, I suppose. But suffice to say that, technically speaking, these very old, ancient swords were excellently made. They had a sophisticated form of silver inlay, so even beautifully decorated. And when it comes to their durability and how they were made, they might even outperform some later Bronze Age blades. And to understand a little more about this, we need to look at the site. Now, one of the characteristics of this specific geolocation is that it's interesting because it's a result of a merging or even melting pot of several different cultures, which could also explain how possibly different techniques were put together between wise men of this specific smithing persuasion as they got together in a cooperative manner to produce such high-end blades. And the cultures that we're talking about are the Kura Araxes, coming from Caucasus, which was based on sheep farming, and the Uruk culture, coming from Mesopotamia, which instead was based on traditional farming. Now, even though these specific swords are the most ancient we can find, it doesn't mean that they were the only type of swords made of arsenical bronze of this level of quality of the period. In fact, these would be used in relatively common both in the Near East but also in the Mediterranean basin at the time. And ultimately, the reason why such type of arsenic bronze technology was abandoned in favor of tin bronze technology is mostly because of something called progressive muscle atrophy. In other words, arsenic was extremely dangerous for the smiths of the time, which is probably where we have the connection of Vulcan, so the smith of the gods that couldn't even walk. So it's mythology, it's a myth, but the connotations to something that actually happened to smiths at the time was very real. But I've spoken in details about this on this video, link in the description. Now, we've been speaking about weapons, and I have a thing or two to say still, and I'd like to start talking a little bit about the bow and arrow, not just as a hunting implement, which of course is as old as, most likely goes all the way back to the Mesolithic period, but as a weapon of war, used not to kill game, but to kill other humans. And I don't have a bow to show you yet. If we were to look for the first case in history of the bow used as a weapon of war, then the date would be 5100 BC, approximately. And it is connected to a finding from 1983 in Germany. A rather macabre finding, unfortunately. But I mean, what did you expect? An archery tournament? In Talheim, Germany, we have a prehistorical linear pottery culture settlement connected to the Neolithic period. And in this location, we have what would be called a mass grave. So differently from the sort of ceremonial burial that we have discussed when talking about the gold, in this case we don't have any form of ceremony, and we have many bodies thrown all together into a common hole, which was then covered. So most likely this is a result of a warring act. And considering the large number of infants and women, this will be the result of some kind of plundering or razing, rather than a battle. Within the grave, we have 9 males, 7 females, the remains of 2 more adults, which unfortunately are so fragmented as to make it impossible to figure out the sex, and unfortunately 16 children. Well, each of these individuals' death that was put inside this grave was a result of a violent death. 18 of these skulls show signs of cuts which were most likely connected to flint axes. 14 have been caved in as a result of either blunt weapons or perhaps, they say, the back end of the axe. But 2 of these skulls show cuts which have been definitely connected to arrow head points, suggesting that the whole murderous act was not just carried out with hand-to-hand combat, but also with arrows. Some kind of ambush, most likely. Okay, all of this killing is not really putting me in the best of moods, so let's talk about something a little lighter before we go back to more weapons, and that is soap. That's my stress relief. Soap is absolutely something we take for granted and something that we use on a daily basis, whether it be to wash our clothes, to wash ourselves, to wash our hands. And oftentimes we have this misunderstanding that people, whether it be in the medieval period or even in previous periods, were in fact dirty but they weren't. I mean, humankind has always considered the need for personal cleanliness as something very important. I mean, at the end of the day, even animals wash themselves constantly, so why wouldn't we be washing ourselves as much as we can? But of course, without soap, this is not the easiest endeavor. So when was soap invented? Who came up with this idea first? I just wash my hair. Can you tell? Where the heck does it reach? Seriously. Next time I'm gonna do who invented barbers first and why their invention was absolutely useless to the likes of me. So the most ancient testimony when it comes to the production of detergents that would be connected to something at least similar to soap, how we imagine it, comes from Mesopotamia, specifically southern Mesopotamia, and it's as old as 3000 BC, so 5,000 years ago. The Sumeric tablets, which come from the site of Gersu, the current city of Tello in Iraq, speak about a soap which was made of sesame oil mixed with animal fat, and we are told that it was used to clean clothes. So fabric. But when it comes to detergents for the body, usually when you Google it, the first piece of information that you're presented with has to do with the Egyptians and a specific papyrus of 1500 BC, the papyrus of Ebers. Now, even though the sort of remedies that are presented in this papyrus are usually considered to be the ancestors of modern-day soap, the reality is that we are most likely looking at some sort of creams that were in fact used instead, not for washing, but rather for curing and healing and mending of specific wounds and conditions. So rather than being seen as an ancestor of soap, it should be considered as the ancestor of some sort of pharmaceutical remedies, if you will. These will be based on clay, salts of natron, vegetable and animal oils, all mixed together with some exfoliating elements or ingredients such as the ostrich egg shell powder, turtle egg shell powder, and bran, which is still used today as an exfoliating ingredient in some modern soaps. Rich, Por, and bran. Consistency of mankind. Do what? Now, even though these seem interesting as ingredients and rather harmless, there are also ingredients that are not so much. For example, cat feces, dog feces, and the feces of a scribe. So these, of course, would have more of a magical function rather than... you get it. Now, when it comes to Europe proper, the history of soap seems to be instead connected to the Celts, so Celtic cultures and populations. And even the Latin word sapo, which we believe has, etymologically speaking, Germanic origins, is connected to a substance that was invented and used by the Gauls. Pliny the Elder speaks about this specific invention and says that as you mix the fat of like pig fat and some form of ash, it would be a great remedy if you had skin problems. Even going as detailed as telling us what wood produces the best ashes for the job, namely elm and birch. But if the Celts are the ones who made it, why is the word instead taken from Germanic? And once again, Pliny sort of tells us that because apparently even though the Celts invented it, this was very popular in Germania with specifically Germanic women. As an interesting fun fact, it is also the fact that Pliny mentions not only that they used it as a remedy to cure skin disease, but also that they were using it to dye their hair red. However, it's important to say that even though that's what Pliny said, that's according to Pliny's understanding, but it's highly likely that Pliny misunderstood it, and instead the Germanic tribes used two separate substances. One was closest to a soap or detergent, while another, called pila mattiaca, was instead the substance used to dye your hair red. Redheads were popular, back then, right now, anytime. However, to really connect the word sapo, used by the Latins, to this, we have to wait all the way to the 2nd century, and specifically a Greek medical doctor called Areteo. He mentions a few interesting ingredients, and then also goes on to say that the Gauls used these ingredients to create spheres that their people used for 2 reasons. To clean clothes, but they were really good at cleaning human skin too. Okay, so we talked about the bow, but then a new question arises. Well, now we know sort of when the bow was first used for war. What about the crossbow? Who invented the crossbow? Who first came up with this idea of an alternative mechanism for a ranged weapon that just functioned differently from, the bow that was already thousands of years old? And what was the first case in which that was used for war? Well, the first archaeological examples that have to do with the crossbow as an alternative mechanism have to do with Chinese history, and they are dated to the 6th century BC. We're talking specifically about bronze release mechanism made of several pieces that were fused or cast singularly and then assembled together into one coherent mechanism. As an interesting fun fact, the earliest models of Chinese crossbow were not shooting darts, but they were shooting little balls, as they are often compared in literature to shooting moons. And such type of projectile was kept all the way to the 1st century BC, when it would be swapped for actual darts as we imagine them. So first we shoot balls, then we start shooting darts, then we go back to balls with arquebuses, and then with bullets, which are interesting. Here is an example of a crossbow mechanism found in the province of Shandong in China, or in Chinese, Shandongsheng, in the town of Qufu. Interestingly enough, that's actually the town where Confucius is from. 孔夫子的老家. Now, when it comes to Europe, the first crossbow mechanism was developed independently from the Far East towards the end of the 5th century BC. These are usually called belly bows, in Greek at least if you want to look at the literal translation, and it was called like this because this sort of crossbow was in fact placed on the warrior's belly and then on the floor to reload. Biton of Pergamon, an ancient Greek engineer and writer, tells us that the invention of this crossbow was to be attributed to the Greek philosopher and scientist Zophiros of Taranto, who was a famous inventor of war machines. Interestingly enough, however, differently from China, in the West, the crossbow did not get and will not become an emergent or main weapon of war all the way up to the late Middle Ages. even though it was known and even used up to a certain extent by Imperial Romans. Vegetius speaks about two distinct types of ranged weapons called the manu ballista and the arcoballista. And even today, historians are trying to figure out if these were some sort of field artillery, war machines, a prototype of crossbow, a handheld weapon. There still is a certain level of debate. However, when it comes to literary examples, all we need to do is look at Arrianus, who speaks specifically about the usage of a weapon which most likely is some form of light handheld crossbow. And as he's speaking about soldiers casting darts towards their enemies as they are riding their horses, he tells us not with a bow, but with a machine. Now, when it comes to the early crossbows in Europe, at least, there is a similar or analogous situation with a bow. As we said, the bow begins, even though much earlier, as a hunting implement and then is transformed into a weapon of war. But similarly, it's possible that the crossbow itself had a beginning as a hunting system, at least with some populations. For example, the Picts, of which usage we have iconographic evidence. Okay, all of this shooting made me want to, wear armor because you don't want to die. So what is the oldest form of armor ever used in the world? Well, it is possible that the most ancient piece of evidence when it comes to armor was Egyptian, dated to the 11th or 12th dynasty, so approximately 2000 or 1800 BC. Once again, 5,000 years ago. What we are talking about, however, is not a single sheet or a single plate armor, but something closer to lamella, in the sense that we have small little plates that would be sewn onto a garment to produce a full-on suit of armor. These can still be observed at the Petrie Museum. However, it's important to say that such little plates do only have 2 holes and placed in a way per length that we usually don't see in any other form of lamellar armor in history, so we can't be 100% sure that this is actual armor. Another example of ancient armor that we do know for a fact that was some form of body armor comes from Omsk in Siberia, and it has to do with a lamellar suit made of bone, connected to the Krotov culture, dated to 1900 to 1500 BC. Last but not least, when it comes to the archaeological evidence to talk about the earliest metal type of armor in the world, where these connect to the very beginning of this video and the Mitannic kingdom, specifically in the city of Nuzi. We're talking about lamellae made of copper, connected through the center and dated to the 16th century BC. Luckily, we can back these and the way they were used with literary examples and mentions within Mitannic tradition. And we even know the original word, which is this one here, which indicates lamella husberg, so a full body protection made of these lamellae. 400 or 500 of these would be sewn on top of a cloth or fabric support to create the thorax protection, or protection for the chest, 160 for the sleeves and 140 for the helmet, for a full-on weight between 15 and 35 kilograms. Okay, noble ones, well, I hope that you enjoyed this video. If you did, please remember thumbs up, and if you're not yet members of this community, become a noble one. Subscribe to my channel for more content from the Metatron. I hope you enjoyed it, and let me know what you think in the comments below. Of course, don't forget to click the link in the description to take advantage of the amazing offer that Atlas VPN has for you. Thank you very much for watching, and remember, the Metatron has spread his wings. Goodbye.